In this lecture, we will build the overall layout of our app, and so we will first discuss how to do that, and then use Flexbox for the first time in real life to create a part of that layout. So looking at the final design of our app, what can we say about the overall layout of this interface? Well, first of all, there is this huge container here, so all of this which actually holds the entire app. Okay? And that container is then also nicely centered here in the viewport. So that's the first element of the layout. Then in this container, we first have this header part here, let's say, where we have the logo, the search bar, and then these user navigation items. Okay, so this here is the header. And then below that, we basically have two big parts. The first one I call the sidebar, which is this one here. So it has this navigation and it has this small legal text here, okay? And then on the right side, we have this hotel overview, which is how I like to call this. So a huge block which then contains all of this information about this hotel that we're currently watching. So these are the three big parts inside of the container. First the header here on top, then on the left side the sidebar, and then here on the right side the hotel view. Okay? So let's mark that up in HTML before we start writing the CSS for that. So let's start with the overall container, and I'm using a div element for that. And once again using emmet here, so container. So that's our container where all the content will be. Then in there we have, as I mentioned, the header, and for that one we're going to use the header element in HTML5, okay? So header with the class of header, okay? So that's the top part, let's actually write header in here. So the header part, and then remember that we have the sidebar and the hotel view. Now in order to position these two elements, we actually need a container for them, okay? And I'm going to call that one content. So I'm using a div again, and then content. So basically the content is like the entire part which is below the header. So it's the sidebar, for which I'm using the nav HTML5 element, because it mainly holds our navigation, okay? And so I think nav is the best element to show that, to convey that meaning to the element, okay? So nav and then sidebar. So I'm writing navigation here just so we know what box is what, and then we have the hotel view. And this time I'm using the main HTML5 element because I think this is the perfect element, because as the name says, the main element is where the main part of a website or a web app goes. And in this case, that's clearly this hotel view. Okay, and so main is perfect here. So hotel view. And that is actually already our overall layout. Okay, so that's exactly what we have here. Header, then the content, which is all of this together, and then on the left side, the navigation, or the sidebar actually, how I called it, and then here on the right side, the hotel view. Okay, so let's now move over to our layout file here and start writing our code. So we have our container, we have our header, the content, sidebar, and finally hotel view. And let's start with our container. So the first thing I want to define is the width of this container. And I'm once again going to use max width here, so that the container can decrease if there's not enough space to display our 120 rem, which is the width that we want for this container. Okay, so 1200 pixels basically, if we have enough space, but if it's not enough space, so if the viewport is less than 1200 pixels, then we simply occupy 100% of that available viewport width. Okay, and that's what max width does. All right, then I also want to center it in the viewport. And I'm using our old trick here with margin. Okay, so top and bottom, let's actually put 8 rem here, so 80 pixels, and then the left and right side set to auto, as we did in the previous project as well. Okay, and so that centers the container inside of its parent element, which is the body in this case. Now we also want a background color in this container, and the one I'm going to use is color gray light 2. Okay, so this one, let me show it to you. So base I'm actually going to leave it open here. So this is the gray color that I defined for the background. Okay. And then we also want a nice box shadow. And a really dark one, actually. So 0 in the X direction, of course. Then 2 rem. And now 6 rem, so really huge blur here. And then a 0.3 opacity, okay? So let's actually take a look at that. Well, actually, before we should maybe define a height here as well. So a max, or actually a min height. Okay, and so this is just for testing purposes once again. Okay, and so now we can take a look at the result. And here we go. Okay, let's close this one here. And so that looks pretty good already. So we have our nice shadow here, and we can see our 3 layout elements here as well. So header, navigation, and hotel view. So let's go back. And actually we can reuse this shadow maybe in the future. And so I want to show you that we cannot only use colors, we can use other stuff as well as variables, okay? So let's add a new one here, simply called shadow dark. And then we can do it like this. So variables, of course, not only work for colors here, but we can store other things in there as well. So let me now just copy this. And then in here, I can simply say var again, and then the name of the variable. So let's check that out. And you see it still works the same, okay? And so now if we need it, we can reuse it later in the project. Okay, so now it's time for the header. And here, once again, I'm going to define a height. And this one will be 7 rem, so 70 pixels in height. I want it to have a background color, a white one. And this time I'm simply just going to write out FFF because I know that that means white. And then it should also have a border bottom. Okay, and actually the color that I want here is this light gray. And the one that I want here is the gray number 1. Okay, so these are just very subtle variations of the same light gray. So let me show that to you. Okay, and so here you see it. Okay, so next up, let's think about the navigation and the hotel view. So for the sidebar, we want a background color of this dark gray here. So the darkest color of all. So var and gray dark 1. And on the hotel view, we simply want a white background. So let's grab this one as well. And let's now take a look again. And all right, now of course, we want these two to be side by side, right? So the navigation on the left side, in the hotel view on the right side. And what is the perfect tool for doing that? And I'm sure you guessed it, we're going to use Flexbox now. So in order to start Flexbox, all we need to do is to set the display property of the Flex container to Flex, right? So display Flex, and that's it. So this one here, of course, will be our Flex container, right? Because it's the one that holds the 2 elements we want side by side. So content will be our Flex container, and sidebar and hotel view will be our 2 Flex items. Okay, so just to see if this actually worked, let's take a look. And yeah, so actually they are side by side now, not occupying a lot of space, of course, but they are already side by side. And so that's a good starting point. Now let's set some properties on the individual items in order to make them look more like this here, okay? So the navigation should have a width, and I'm sure that you know how to do that, right? So the property that we use with Flexbox to define width is the Flex basis property. Now we should always use it in the shorthand Flex property, okay? So that's what we're going to do now. So Flex, then the first one is Flex grow, and we don't want the element to grow beside the width that we're going to define. We also don't want it to shrink, okay? Because remember that the second value here stands for Flex shrink, so it's 0 as well. And then we want the Flex basis, which is 18%. And that's it. So 18% is the number that I came up with, which is the perfect width for this sidebar. But you can experiment with other numbers here until it fits the perfect width for you. And so that's it. So once again, with Flex, we said that we don't want the element to grow if there's some space. We also don't want it to shrink if there's not enough space. but we always wanted to keep at 18%. And since it's a percent value here, it's actually okay to say that we don't want it to shrink, because it will automatically shrink because it's a percentage, right? So it's not like a pixel value. In that case, it would be better to allow it to shrink, but right now it's good like this, okay? So let's check it out. And all right, you see here that it has now this 18%. In the hotel view, well, it's still this very small. Let's actually give it a background color as well, a different one. So just to see it a bit better. So I'm sure you guessed it, it's orange red again. So you see that this element is still very small, which of course we don't want. We want it to occupy the entire remaining space, right? So using flexbox terms, we want it to grow as much as it can. And what that means in code is to simply say flex1. Okay, and that's it. So again, by using flex1, what we say is that the element should grow as much as it can. So over all the available space that it has. And that's what happened here. So it now grew all the way until the right side and is occupying the remaining 82%, right? So 100 minus 18 is 82. And so that is the power of Flexbox. There's no floats, there is no clear fixes, there's no weird hacks like all that. Just very simple, just 3 lines of code actually. We just wrote this flex here, and the display to flex. So that was all we needed to create this small layout. Okay, and that's actually all I had to show you in this lecture. So the overall layout is now coded up, and we're ready to start building here the header. So that's what we're going to do right in the next lecture.